Hello everybody, I'm the artist Neil Myers and welcome to my studio here in Oro Valley, Arizona, just outside of Tucson. I thought it might be fun to answer a few questions that I commonly get about my work. A sort of, self-made interview of sorts, shot with a little flip camera here in my studio. There are a lot of kind of common questions I get about my work because the style is rather unusual. And the look and the result of what you get at the end is fairly well unlike what you see in a lot of southwestern painting, and certainly completely different to cowboy painting or plein air painting or any of that. One of the first things people ask are who are your influences and who are the painters that you like and the painters that you look at for inspiration. The top of the line, undoubtedly the number one in my mind and my heart, is Jean-Claude Killissi, who's a very dear friend of mine, a pretty well celebrated French artist. He currently works and lives in Provence in southern France, and we've been friends since probably around 1994 or 5. His cousin was one of the gentlemen that taught me French at Lenoir-Rhyne University in North Carolina. And when I met this cousin and he found out that I liked art, he said, well, you have to come to my office and I'll show you some of my cousin's work. He said, my cousin is famous in France. And I discovered Jean-Claude Killissi, who was really, was a kindred spirit from the beginning. He was deeply inspired by Van Gogh, he was deeply inspired by color, and those areas of the south of France and Mediterranean, Provence. He also later made a huge name for himself painting Greece and places like Mykonos and Santorini. But anyway, I was later able to meet Jean-Claude. The first time, we couldn't chat so much because I didn't speak French quite so well, and the second time, after I was a student in France, I got to go up in 1996 and spend time with him at his Sun Gallery in Paris, France. And we had a wonderful time, and he sent me away with a very expensive book for a gift. And I remember seeing a painting of I think Alvor in Portugal that was hanging out of the window of that gallery, and I remember thinking, you can't hardly even see anything else on the street. That painting is so beautiful and so bright. And I was moved by Killissi mainly in two ways, because his colors were fantastic. He was a very great purist, a color purist, and he had this very curious habit of, he painted with thick paint, but he smoothed it into these long slabs. I think in French they call it des éclats de couleur. These long, thick cut slabs of color, which really had kind of a curious emotional content to it, and they always kind of haunted me in the back of my mind even before I adopted some of that look into my own painting. But Killissi was, I pretty much the only man on earth I would call, he's the only person I would call master of sorts, at least for me. I have kind of my own problems with authority. I don't bow down to too much for any reasons, but in the sense of master or friend, he really just offered me his friendship. He offered me encouragement, and he offered me examples of his work, posters, prints, and all that, to actually say, well, this is one direction how you do it. He never really sat and told me, go do this or paint this way or that way. That's the best kind of instruction, especially for people like me who are resistant to kind of traditional forms of instruction. Of course, I'm also a huge lover of the work of Van Gogh. I've never ceased to enjoy Van Gogh's work, even though, I think his kind of aggressive temperament made the work even on occasion borderline messy. When he was at his best, he was unstoppable and really beautiful. And the greatest Van Goghs, the ones we know, are well deserving of that reputation. But I think that there was some irregularities in his work as far, it had a lot to do with his temperament. He had a lot, he could bang out 3 paintings in a day. which is a curious phenomenon. I mean, it's not uncommon for me to take anywhere from a week to 3 to 4 weeks to finish a painting, one painting. But anyway, so I'm a little bit more slow and kind of methodical in that regard. But I've always loved Van Gogh. I've always been. I was blown away when I saw the Chambre de Van Gogh they have at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris in 1996, which was a wonderful motivator. And again, the best Van Goghs will just knock your socks off, and they're really special and they're really meaningful for the art world. And I'm not one to subscribe too heavily to people's interest in Van Gogh based on his mental problems and his life issues. I really do think his triumph was as an artist. It wasn't as some poor unfortunate fellow who painted all these things and then gave up. I think he had really, really extraordinary abilities, and of course he showed it. I think producing something like over 700 pieces of art in 10 years, I think I heard. Something to that effect. Another artist that has always inspired me, certainly since I moved to the Southwest. He's not explicitly a Southwestern painter, but another really good one is Gary Ernest Smith. You can see his works at Medicine Man Gallery. You can see him at Overland Gallery in Scottsdale. I believe he's based in Utah. I actually, sometime about 2005, 2006, I went to a show opening over here in Tucson that he was at. And I got a chance to chat with him and hang out with him for about a half an hour. Finally had to let him go, because he was in great demand, but he and I had a great time talking about art. And he also is sort of an apprentice to this idea about color and thick paint, though he uses it quite differently than, Kelly C. Van Gogh or anything like that. He is a little more subtle. His formats are really interesting because he does these very, very large format paintings, and some that can swallow up. They remind me almost of the abstract artists who have done these gigantic wall-sized paintings. And Gary has frequently done fields and these large open spaces that kind of fill up on their own while you're looking at them, but they're really, really cool and really interesting and quite original. And those are probably the primary three artists. I sometimes get motivation from things that I see, obviously, even though I don't paint that way. I've always been a gigantic fan of Michelangelo. I think if you can't fall down in adoration at that kind of talent, you're probably not breathing. He was really, truly extraordinary. He was, when I saw I saw him in reproductions. I've not been to the chapel, but when I saw the refurbished Sistine ceiling where they had cleaned it, and I know that was kind of a big debate about whether to do it or not. But anyway, after that restoration was done, at least what was done to believe to be the approximate colors that he used, I mean, that showed he was a colorist as well. I mean, these blazing blues and yellows and oranges that were just stunning. And a lot of the content of my own work, the emotional content, is really color-based. I frequently will kind of put color in front of form, in front of, before subject, before anything. When I look at a painting, I'm usually having some kind of emotional response to color, primarily. I mean, I'm certainly not one of those kinds of people who would, carry on, sort of trying to make something look exactly like a tree would look or anything like that. I'm an expressionist in that regard. I enjoy, working with the paint, seeing what happens. It sometimes will produce irregular results, and, you have to keep working until you get it right. And you have to accept that, it's maybe a bit of an incongruent way to do it. But it's also a consequence of the fact that I didn't go to art school either. I was a French major in college. I had a lot of exposure to art, and I always drew and painted from the time that I was quite small. My mom actually painted pictures. In fact, there's one on the studio wall up there that she did. But, it took a great deal of time to sort of evolve this style, but it was really a fusion of the painters that I loved. And it was part of kind of a product of my mind's eye. It really didn't exist anywhere. I felt pretty sincerely that, you know, painting like this, at least in the American West and the American Southwest, didn't really exist. It was perhaps more of kind of a French-inspired Southwestern painting, using some of their, you know, modes of expression and color and things like that. You know, I think it traces back, most certainly to Chilisi. It traces back to Ambrogiani as well, who was his master and his friend. And it's what I do is a bit of a kickoff of, you know, traditional Fauvism or Provençal painting as well. But it's very hard. I guess it's very hard to describe with the traditional isms. I think I've probably most accurately been described as an expressionist, and that's the term that I'm most comfortable with. But no, I didn't go to art school, and you know, I think that works for some people. I think it certainly may not work for others. From my point of view, at least, that it's what I understand to be the case is that frequently when you're in an art class, the professor tries to turn you into the likes and the wishes and the forms of the style, quite truthfully, of the professor. Some people consider that kind of an indispensable aspect of teaching, and I don't. I really don't. I felt that if I was going to do something special, I had to do it on my own. And, you know, I did it with some minimal input from people that I trusted, but pretty much with a giant disregard for the rest, because I knew it didn't suit my temperament anyway. And I've talked about in the past how, you know, I operate under a kind of a, I've called it in a blog before, a fortunate tunnel vision, meaning that rather than spending a great deal of time with other artists and rather than having sort of inputting all that into my mind, being their styles, their work and all that, I usually block most of it out of my mind. And I pretty much just try to be faithful to what's in my mind's eye. And I actually find that limiting my contacts with other artists is actually helpful, because, you know, I mean, there are some that I trust. There are some that are very dear friends of mine. You know, I'll go and spend time and look at their works and enjoy it thoroughly. But as far as sitting down to do these side-by-side things and sort of expose myself to maybe critiques from their point of view, I shut all that out entirely. I really don't even put myself in that position, because I feel like what I do is a result of trusting a certain intuition about nature and the way that I look at things. And I look at the rest of it as kind of noise, you know, and I try to avoid that noise and sort of listen to that kind of quiet voice inside myself that says, do it this way or try it that way. And, you know, it's certainly a non-traditional thing. I know a lot of painters love to fraternize and put up their easels in a row, and all of them do a beautiful landscape, but you're probably not going to find me in that situation. You know, I'm kind of monkish the way that I work, and I work alone in kind of a quiet place, and kind of push most everything else that seems to be a distraction out of my mind. But, you know, and I think one of the cardinal rules about art is that you have to find what works for you. Other people benefit strongly from that sort of, you know, fraternal hanging out with other painters and getting their input, you know, cross-critiquing or any of that. It may work well for somebody, just as art school I've seen has worked wonders for many, many people, but it didn't suit my temperament. I guess if I was wise, I knew it, and that was my advantage, I guess.